Hey everybody, welcome. Welcome to Richard's Reads. This is the first one we've done. Pretty excited about it. I got some echo over here from my own system. Um, doing Richard's Reads, we're going to be reading from my first novel, Dissolution of Peace. This is the first one, so we'll start with chapter one, of course. I have everything ready. Got some water here, which I'll need. I hope I have you guys in chat following along. Hey, let's look. Comments, questions, um, things like that, welcome. Throw them in the chat. And as I look up from reading, I'll answer them. Um, Hit that follow if you enjoy what you're seeing. Honestly, you can hit the follow even if you don't enjoy what you're seeing. Hello, Huku. So we're going to get started. I read actually from a book. And actually this book is this particular copy is kind of special to me. This is a copy I had given to my grandmother. As you can see, it has my scratch on there. Um, and when she passed away, the book came back to me. And so it's kind of important to me. So I thought, it'd be nice to have my grandma with me in this reading. So we're going to read from this one. Um, so let's get started. So the book is dedicated to my three boys. I say to them, keep dreaming big and never let go of those dreams. I got a quote in here. I start all of my novels with a quote. And so it says here, it isn't enough to talk about peace. One must believe in it. And it isn't enough to believe in it. One must work at it. That's Eleanor Roosevelt. Hello, Unicorn Taco. Some ambient music. Yeah, we might think about that. We'll see how boring my voice is. All right, chapter 1. Janice Cantor was mesmerized by the size of the warship as it blocked the view of the stars through the window of the runabout. She knew the ship was big, but to see the size of it now, even at this distance, was awe-inspiring. The Navy had nicknamed these warships flying bricks because of their shape and size. The name was accurate. It appears to be a giant gray brick floating in space. As the runabout circled the warship, awaiting clearance to land, the details became more apparent. The flight deck could be seen below the engines. The hull was speckled with cannon slots. How many guns did a ship in a peaceful navy really need? The bridge dome was on the top front, and the large letters read ESS Australia. The approach to the flight deck reminded her of her hatred for spaceflight. She looked away from the windows to see a crewman sitting next, or looked away from the windows to the crewman sitting next to her. She turned away quickly. She wasn't sure if he was checking her out or just staring because of her uniform. It was probably the latter. She was the only one wearing it in the runabout filled with Navy crewmen. Her dark gray uniform, with its black accents, contrasted with the tan Navy uniforms. It was more than a simple difference that caught their eyes. It was what her uniform symbolized: law enforcement. She smiled at the crewman when he turned to glance at her again. A stray hair contrasted with the earth on her arm patch, and so she dusted it off. The image of the planet spread out like an atlas was the only color on the entire dark uniform. Its blues and greens highlighted by the black backgrounds of the circle patch, with the words security along the top and forces on the bottom. The crewman turned away again. Do you ever get used to spaceflight? Janice said to the man. I hate it. I don't know. It's my first assignment. He smiled, but only out of pleasantries. They tell me you don't even notice you're moving on a ship that size. I hope so. Janice turned back to the window. She could see the rapidly growing size of the flight deck. The sheer size of the opening made her feel as if she was being swallowed by a beast. She sunk in her seat, realizing they were about to land. Being in space was bad enough. She really hoped she could get used to it. The reality was she just didn't like this assignment. She had only gone to protective services training because it was made clear to her that if she couldn't promote unless she got a specialty assignment. She planned for a 6-month assignment protecting some governor, not a military assignment, and certainly not a space assignment. It would be at least a year before she could get back to patrol. The shuttle surged forward as it hit the deck. She swallowed hard to hide her reaction. As soon as the light turned on, she unhooked her restraints and made her way to the ramp in the middle of the shuttle. She was glad she had all her belongings sent up ahead of her. She was halfway down the ramp before it even hit the deck. Janice started making her way to the back of the flight deck when someone yelled at her. She turned around quickly to see a man in the same uniform at her pointing at her. "Hey, get over here!" His stern face made Janice pause. "Yes, you. Where are you going? You're holding up the rest of the people." "What?" Janice walked over. "Everyone boarding the ship has to be checked in." He made no effort to hide his annoyance. He pulled out a small device no bigger than the palm of his hand. It was the chip scanner. "Even us?" She moved her hair from the back of her neck. "This must be your first military assignment." The man's face softened a bit, and there was a bit less aggravation in his tone. He scanned the back of her neck and read over the screen. "Everyone is checked in and checked out, no matter what branch or how long their stay will be. Anyway, your orders check out. Corporal Carlson has asked you to meet him over there." Janice surveyed the area he gestured to. At the far side of the bay stood a man in a dress uniform, which really just included a tie. That was her new partner, a corporal even. Janice wished she'd read her orders a little bit better. As she approached him, he put out his hand. She shook it firmly. "You must be Corporal Carlson. You didn't have to meet me here." "Mike is fine, and I just came back from a couple weeks of shore leave." He turned. "Follow me. It's much quieter once we get off the flight deck." Carlson was a tall man, even with Janice's height. Dark black hair was trimmed within regulations, but was hardly the typical high and tight that most wore. He was thin, but just a hint of muscle could be seen on his arms. He wasn't all that attractive, but he wasn't ugly either. As they stepped through the doorway, Carlson spoke. "Ah, there, that's better. Well, welcome to the Australia. She's a good ship, and the captain is a good person to work for. Better than most captains to protect, or so I've been told." "Youngest commanding officer in the fleet, too." Janice moved up to catch up to Carlson. "Ah, so you did read some of your file, then." Carlson seemed to be judging Janice with his eyes. She was sure of it. She was sure it was because she was new to this. She only nodded in response. "Good. She's smart and deserves to be in command." The interior of the ship's walls were a nondescript blue, much like a cubicle. Screens were near every major junction, and the lighting was really good. Janice had worried that working in space would be dark and depressing, and this was the opposite. She noticed a lot of people moving around the ship, a lot more people than she had thought she would see on a Navy ship. The crew complement must have been large. That information was probably in the orders she'd barely read. "You didn't have to get dressed up for me," Janice broke the silence. When Carlson gave her a puzzled look, she flashed a quick smirk to show she was kidding. Carlson turned and studied the floor in front of him. "I was attending an officer's funeral today. I arrived back on the ship in the runabout before yours." "Oh," Janice studied Carlson's reaction. If I may ask, was it your old partner?" "No." There was a trace of anger she saw in his eyes. Carlson changed subjects. "You were quite the star at the academy. Top marksman with the L pistol, third with the rifle, top in your class on academics, and second best in physical fitness." Janice really wished she'd have bothered to read up on Carlson a little more. Hell, she wished she'd read anything about him. Why was he talking about her time at the academy anyway? That was years ago. "Yeah?" "Yet you barely passed protective service training. Fourth from the bottom." Janice didn't like having that pointed out to her. She could have and should have done better. "And now you're stuck with me." "No, I picked you." Carlson looked her over again. "I asked for records, not names and descriptions." And why do you want the fourth from the bottom?" "There are two reasons most people join protective services. They either want to protect the Prime Minister," Carlson stopped at the hallway, "or They just want an easy specialty so they can return to patrol and promote. You think you got me figured out then, is it? Janice spoke, trying to control her tone. Who was this corporal to analyze her records and make judgments about her? And why did it bother her that he was right? I'm not sure about that, Carlson said. He activated a screen on a screen at the intersection. This screen will show you a map of the ship. Your stuff should be in your quarters. Our first shift is tomorrow night, third watch. See you then. Janice watched him walk away. Space work, a smart-ass corporal for a partner, and graveyard. This was going to be a long year. That's chapter 1. I write nice short chapters, so we'll feel really accomplished by the end of this reading. All right, chapter 2. A twinge of pain shot through Captain Christina Serenity's left hip. Maybe she should have persuaded the doctor to clear her for duty, or maybe she shouldn't have persuaded the doctor to clear her for duty, but she wasn't about to spend any longer in that hospital bed surrounded by her 2 bodyguards and thinking about what happened to her. She had a ship to run. Besides, the longer she sat in bed, the more the Admiral would think of ways to replace her. An injury would be a perfect justification, and she wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. So she lied about the pain, and they listed her fit for duty. She sat down at the desk of her ready room right off the bridge when there was a knock on the door. One of the Protective Services officers opened it. Lieutenant Commander Zimmerman was standing there, waiting to be acknowledged. Come in. Sit down. Serenity turned to the officers. Wait outside. Once they left, Zimmerman, who was still standing, spoke. How are you feeling, ma'am? No need to be so formal, Zach. And for God's sake, please sit down. Serenity waited for him to sit on the couch before she sat at her desk. I'm doing fine. Just glad to be back up and moving around. Sick bay can be confining. What about having the protection detail following you around? I've always been used to that. Zimmerman just stared at her. He wasn't accepting that answer, so Serenity let out a sigh. Well, they are a reminder of what happened, and reminders are the last thing I need. But I tell myself that they didn't do it, one man did. So it's tough, but nothing to worry about. She gauged Zimmerman's body language. And that stays between us. They're a part of the job, and that's the last thing I need getting back to the Admiral. Of course, you can trust me, Zimmerman. Zimmerman wore his trademark big grin with his white teeth gleaming. You don't think the Admiral would do that? The Admiral has made it no secret that he doesn't like young captains commanding ships. He already talked Captain Trinity into a desk job with false promises of a promotion. But this is where I wanted to be. This was always my goal. The Admiral had hoped to put her on a lousy ship, but she had managed to fight for what was rightfully hers, the first available command, the Australia. So yes, I think the second he has an excuse to move me, he will. Age shouldn't be a factor, Zimmerman was right, it shouldn't be. He was 15 years older than Serenity, but never once treated her as anything less than the captain. But I'm sure you're right. Admirals are more involved in politics than leadership. Are we preparing for the Peace Day ceremonies? The Admiral will be contacting me soon about my return to duty, and I'd like to have something to tell him on the status of our ship. The last of the new crewmen are aboard. They look forward to this, so they have been eager to help and prepare. You enlist in the Earth Navy to see space, not just Earth orbit. The only upside to being here is participating in Peace Day festivities. Just another way the Admiral has us. A buzz came from her desk transmitter. She pressed the blinking button on the screen. Yes. Admiral McCorvick for you, ma'am. Put it to my desk. Serenity gestured for Zimmerman to stay. She waited for the screen in her desk to show the Admiral's face. Admiral McCorvick, I've been expecting your call. It's good to see you're back to duty. The doctors were surprised how quickly you recovered. McCorvick finally looked up at Serenity. Thank you, sir. I'm just glad I was able to remain in command. I see. McCorvick, went back to reviewing papers in front of him. I have new orders for your ship. You're to head to Earth Martian border and relieve the ESS Everett on Border Patrol duties. These orders are effective immediately. What? Serenity stopped to control herself. For the last month, you've been telling our crew to prepare for Peace Day events. The crew is looking forward to it, sir. In all fairness, Captain, I haven't told you anything in 3 weeks. You were out. I was waiting for you to return. You couldn't tell Zimmerman? Serenity took another breath to hide the pain creeping into her left hip again. These kinds of outbursts are exactly the issue I have with you, Captain. The needs of the Navy change, and you serve the Navy's needs. Surely the Navy has better needs of a warship than Border Patrol. Hell, the Everest is a destroyer, for crying out loud. Sonny's voice had become louder, but she was careful not to yell. The crew expects to host the festivities in 3 days. This isn't fair to them. Fair? McCorvick hit his desk. Your lack of experience is showing again. I feel a captain with more familiarity in military combat operations should be here. We've been at peace for well over 100 years. There's not a captain in this Navy that has any more experience with combat than me, because not one of them has fired a shot in anger. The pain in her hip was so bad she fought to hide it with her own irritation. Our ship has intercepted more drug runners and smugglers than the last 3 ships on this assignment combined. That should testify to my... Enough, Captain. The Everest will handle the near-Earth assignments now. Get underway. Your official orders should be on your screen. The instructions came up on the screen. Serenity glanced over them. There was no need to push her luck with the Admiral over the matter. We will leave within the hour, sir. If that is all, I have matters to attend to. That is all. What do you guys think so far as we head into Chapter 3? Wet my whistle, as they say. Dun, dun, dun. Kind of, yeah. No, kind of. I might lounge back a little bit here and relax a little as I read, if you guys don't mind. I was going to read this in my armchair, but I couldn't get it set up in my office. Chapter 3. Carlson hadn't said much to his new partner over the first 2 shifts. It had made the last 2 nights long. He could pull rank and move to another shift if he'd wanted to, but he liked nights. Carlson wasn't intentionally ignoring Janice, but she didn't say much, and frankly, he didn't expect her to last long. She didn't seem to take it seriously. It was exactly why he picked her. Hoku, you cracked me up there. Hoku says, an armchair, fire in the background, robe and a pipe with a violin faintly playing. Wait, this isn't Sherlock. I kind of like it, except maybe not the pipe. Maybe one of those bubble pipes. Anyway. But she was quickly proving him wrong. The first night she studied the captain's files and the files of the bridge crew. Last night it was the bridge layout and protocols, and even now she continued to study. This time it appeared to be the ship's layout. Janice hadn't been what Carlson expected from day one. She was a beautiful woman, which had been a surprise in itself. She had dark brown hair that might go down past her shoulders if she wore it down. She had an athletic figure that her uniform showed well. She was tall, only a few inches shorter than he, and the few times Carlson had seen her smile, it was radiant. Janice glanced up from her pad at Carlson. He was caught looking at her. Next you're going to be reading my file. She showed him a smile again. I did that before our first shift. Oh, Carlson was surprised. Janice had clearly decided to be more prepared for this assignment than he had expected. You pissed me off when you knew so much about me and I knew nothing about you. Janice set the pad down on the table between them. I'm not about to be shown up again. So he'd been what kick-started her interest in this job. Why'd you skate by in protective services school? Clearly you could have aced it if you put in the effort. You know what? You had it right, Janice shrugged. I was looking for an easy specialty so I could promote. That had likely been what pissed her off, but Carlson had counted on her dropping out quick. So why the sudden interest? If I have to be here, if I have to be here a year, I may as well do it right, especially if I'm going to be partnered with you. Seems you got the job down to a science. Janice smirked. This time, his cheeks flushed a bit. Was she flirting? I guess. I just do the job, even when it's hard. Carlson turned his attention to the ground. It recently had been pretty hard. Your file doesn't say much about your last partner. Carlson hadn't known they removed it from his files, or at the very least put it in a higher clearance. He thought for a moment, not sure how to address it. A red light clicked on above the entrance of the quarters. A few seconds later, a klaxon sounded. Janice jumped up. Carlson was relieved to avoid the issue. It's general quarters. Stand up. That doesn't sound good. It's usually not. Carlson stopped mid-sentence when the captain came out of a room. Serenity glanced at them both as she walked out. Transport crossed the border outside shipping lanes, and it's not responding to our transmissions. She gave Janice a good looking over top to bottom. This would have been her first time seeing her. You know your bridge rules, officer? I'm learning them, but I know to shut up and stay out of the way. That is, unless I have to do something that outranks you, Janice said, with a touch of attitude leaking out. Carlson cleared his throat. Oh, ma'am. Serenity smirked at Janice, turned, and walked out of her quarters. Carlson and Janice right on her heels. Tell me what's going on, Serenity said as soon as she walked on the bridge. She went straight for her seat in the middle of the circle room. Carlson gestured for Canada to stand to the right behind her chair while he took a spot to the left. There's no response to any of our transmissions on all known frequencies, the ensign said. Carlson recognized her. Her name was Willard, if he remembered correctly. We requested destination identification, then the ship changed course. Back to Martian space? Serenity didn't look up from her reports. No, ma'am. Intercept course, Willard said. Moving slowly. No identification beacon. It appears to be a standard shipping transport. Can we get any more information? If we move to intercept, we can be in range for better scans in 5 minutes. Broadcast a message all frequencies. Serenity waited for a signal from Willard. This is Captain Christina Serenity of the ESS Australia. Identify yourselves, or we'll be forced to intercept your vessel. Serenity waited for a response. When there was none, she signaled for the channel to be closed. Move to intercept. Ready a boarding party. Can we detect any damage or signs of distress? Some signs of damage. It appears old. The ship markings have been removed. It appears to have a really thick hull, twice as thick as usual. No weapons detected. All stop. Hard left. Expose the right side cannons and have them acquire the target, but don't fire. Dispatch fighter wings to move in on them. Carlson didn't like the sound of this, but he couldn't really figure out why. Janice had her hand resting on her L pistol. He nudged her and pointed to his own weapon. Her face was puzzled, but she moved her hand. Fern jumped off the transport and began to climb the ramp into his fighter. The fighters were warming up and the rest of his squadron was awaiting takeoff. Fern strapped on his helmet. His four other fighters, their damage, and his pilot's health screens all appeared in his right eyepiece. The squadron received clearance and left the docking base. Fern targeted the vessel and reported in. Alpha Group, move to intercept. Target as ordered. Alpha Leader, Australia Control, the captain orders you to avoid hostile action unless necessary. Fern noticed the transport ship picking up speed, but still heading for the Australia. Alpha Group conducted a flyby of the vessel. The other ships moved into the four corners of the transport. Fern repeatedly hailed the vessel. His scanners reported back additional. Australia Control, the ship is an old troop transport with heavy armor and 200 plus persons on board. Vessel is increasing speed. Message received. Fern heard the transmission coming in from the bridge. Unidentified vessel, you are on a collision course. If you do not alter course, we will engage. The transport altered course and began to pass the Australia. The fighter group stayed on it as it went past the massive warship. Fern let out a sigh of relief to see it keep moving. The transport turned left quickly. The fighters peeled off just in time to avoid a collision. The unidentified ship tripled speed and headed on a collision course for Australia's two docking bays. Unidentified vessels, stand down and prepare to be boarded. Continuing with your course will be considered a hostile act. The transmission from the bridge repeated. Alpha Leader, this is Australia Control. Disable that transport. Fern checked his radar and noticed 10 more contacts crossing into Earth space. Alpha Group engaged the target. He fired the fighter's twin lasers at the bridge of the transport. Australia Control, 10 contacts entering Earth space. Martian vessel on collision course with the docking base. Scramble additional fighter groups. Fern made another firing pass on the transport, but he was unable to keep up with the ship at the speed it was traveling. The Australia's heavy cannons fired on the Martian ship. Fern broke off his pass. His group brought their fighters about only to watch the Martian vessel slam into the docking base. The bridge shook violently. Carlson caught himself on the captain's chair. Reports were being called out from all different stations. Collision at the flight deck. The transport is wedged in tight. Life support is holding in that area. The ship has been boarded with unknown hostiles. Security Forces teams are responding, Major Kingsworth, the Security Forces commander, reported. Seal the bridge. Move the other protective service teams to the access points, Carlson called out. The major gave him a dirty look but did what he said. Radar shows 10 Martian fighters approaching. 2 Martian warships are on the border but holding. Serenity stood up. Send a distress call. Move the fighters in close. There won't be more support. Can we identify Martian warships? Can we identify? No, ma'am. Still trying to get data on them. Open a channel, Serenity said. This is the captain of the ESS Australia. Stand down your fighters. Their actions are considered hostile. Repeat. Stand down your fighters. Captain, the fighters are circling us, but they're outside of cannon range, Willard said. The security forces teams have engaged the unknown attackers on the flight decks. Kingsworth keyed a few more buttons. They're not dressed in any uniform, but they're far from inexperienced. Casualties seem limited at this point. Notify sickbay so they can prepare. Find a safe place to have medical teams stand by, Serenity called out. What do they seem to be after? Captain, aft cannons went offline, the weapons officer shouted. The ship rattled slightly. The fighters have engaged. They seem to be concentrating fire on the rear sections of the ship. Have Alpha Group engage them, Serenity called out over the sound of the ship's cannons. Try to reroute the systems to keep them from getting access. They're powering down another series of cannons, Captain. Notify engineering that I'll be locking them out of their systems. Their codes have been compromised. Serenity keyed something into her chair. My codes aren't responding. How did they lock me out? Serenity looked back at Carlson. He just shrugged. She turned to the major. Get them off my ship now. She spun back around to the engineer. Cut power to the flight deck. All systems except life support. Captain, we're losing fighters. They have us locked out of our systems. I'd have to cut power to the whole deck. Based on what I'm seeing, they're trying to get access to the bridge lockdown controls, the engineer said. They'd have to cross the ship to get here. Serenity paused and addressed Carlson again. Any direct routes? They could try air decks, but they'd still have to cross the whole ship. Serenity turned back to the engineering officer. Are there any air duct access points near the enemies? One, but it doesn't access the bridge. Major? We'll check it out, ma'am, Kingsworth said. We have cut their numbers by 2/3. We should have control over the flight deck soon. Captain, we're losing fighters. We only have 2 left, the weapons officer said. Have them do their best, Serenity turned to Willard. Who's responding to our duress call? We've had multiple responses, ma'am. The carrier Atlantic should be here any moment. Update the Atlantic on our status, Serenity said. No response from the Martian warships? None. Captain, all 200 enemies have been killed, none captured, Kingsworth said. Get an engineering team down there and restore the system, Serenity said. The fighters? They're withdrawing to the Martian warship. The Atlantic is arriving on long range now. They're dispatching a full complement of fighters, Willard replied. The Martian warships are making maneuvers that imply they are preparing to withdraw. Carlson let out a sigh of relief. We all feel that way, Corporal, Serenity said with a smirk, but turned back to her bridge crew. Go to ready stations. I want full reports within the hour, and somebody get that damn transport out of my hull. All right, chapter 3 done. Moving right along. 3 chapters in our 30 minutes together. Pretty exciting. All right. Chapter 4. Janice couldn't sleep after her ship. We really hadn't she really hadn't adjusted to the night work, but really it was a matter of everything that had gone on the night before. She hadn't You able to hear me, Hoku, now? Yay, okay, perfect. Sorry about that, guys. We get to the crisis, and I heard my headset just shut off in my ear. I don't know why. Should have a good battery life on it. It says 100%. So, it just wanted to leave you guys with just a little bit of a cliffhanger before we jumped into chapter 4, I guess. Anyway, let's jump in there. Yes, as Kai would say, shenanigans. The headset is definitely sus. Boom. All right, Nightbot's got it down. All right, guys, let's jump on in. All right. Um, Janice couldn't sleep after her shift. It really hadn't adjusted. She really hadn't adjusted to the night work, but really it was a matter of everything that had gone on the night before. She hadn't expected that much excitement from working on a ship. This was supposed to be peacetime. These things just weren't supposed to happen. A nameless, faceless enemy had attacked an Earth warship. Her adrenaline was still flowing, and the only way she was going to calm down was to walk around, so she'd been wandering the ship for the last hour. The news media was going to have a field day over this. The news media laws wouldn't allow them to broadcast any speculation, but once the Australia arrived at a space dock, all bets were off. Janice knew the routine. They would only report that the ship arrived damaged, but that would be all it would take for the public to start asking questions. Within hours, the Navy or the Prime Minister would be forced to make an official statement. Politics wasn't Janice's thing. But when you work for the government, you learn the game. It was worse when you were in security forces, which was by far the largest branch in the military. When you had to police the world, police the military, and staff the prisons, staff the prison, that was a lot of personnel. The Navy was a distant second, but still had a significant larger staffing than the Army or the Air Force. There just wasn't much need for a standing army when there was peace, and the only threats could come from space. Janice wasn't really sure where she was. She didn't know the ship well outside the maps, and Carlson wasn't being much of a host. His file was about all Janice knew of him. He had served on the Australia for most of his time in security forces, had been in protective services for about 3 years. He had the same partner since he'd been on board, Roger Matthews. There was nothing on him. His file was restricted to a clearance above Janice's. That was odd enough. But there was nothing in the record about why they were suddenly not partners anymore. Janice was beginning to think it had been Matthew's funeral that Carlson attended when she arrived. Janice found a bar on deck 6. She knew there was one up near the shops, but not one down here. It'd be something different than the mess hall, so she went in. It was a lot like the bars on Earth, only cleaner. Dimly lit with dark paint, soft music playing. There were pool tables and booths around the room. To the left was the long bar. Sitting there alone was Mike. Janice took a seat next to him. He'd seen her as soon as she'd got close. He was certainly on his toes. She motioned the bartender over and ordered a drink. Can't sleep either. Can't sleep either? I haven't even tried. Carlson's voice was quiet. That was a first for everyone on this ship. She studied him over a moment. Do you come here often? Carlson gave a chuckle. Actually, I do. It's quieter here. I didn't even know it was here. I used to patrol this deck before I went to Protective Services. Serenity waited as the Admiral poured through the reports. He insisted she remain on the transmission until he had reviewed it. He hadn't said much yet. Why didn't you continue to intercept? The Admiral barely moved when he spoke. He continued to read the tablet in front of him. When I was told the ship had no markings, I was concerned the ship may not have been what it appeared. I felt exposing the most weapons to the transport was more intimidating, Serenity explained. You were right. It wasn't what it appeared to be. Serenity was shocked to hear this from the Admiral. Had he really just said she was right? The Admiral sat back, making eye contact with her. Well done, Captain. You did better than I would have expected. Thank you, sir. Serenity stuttered just a bit, surprised even still. The Admiral continued over her reports. He asked a few more questions, mostly about the attacking force. She referred him to Major Kingworth's report. He asked about the transport, but the technicians were still evaluating the systems and the computers. All right, I'll submit this over to the Prime Minister. He set his tablet down. Do you have a few more minutes? Of course, sir. Serenity had been on the transmission for 30 minutes, so what was 2 more? This is off the record. I'm not supposed to release this to anyone, but you need to know. Admiral McCormick met Serenity's eyes again. This time his eyes were cold and stern. I know we don't get along, but I know you have enough sense of duty to be trusted. Yes, sir. Serenity wondered if the information he was about to share was the reason he was being so kind. Perhaps it was some sort of setup. I received word that Roger Matthews escaped from New Alcatraz. Admiral McCormick voiced with dry, it was almost hoarse. Escaped? That's impossible. Serenity was feeling the pain in her hip again. She trembled slightly, but took control of breaths to steady herself. New Alcatraz was on the moon. It was the first of the Earth's terraforming projects. 2 large domes contain the atmosphere needed for survival. One dome holds Moon City, the other New Alcatraz. Escape meant getting past all the shuttle screens or trying to pass through miles of unprotected space between the domes. No one had ever escaped alive. They haven't found his body on the moon's surface, and I can't relay any details, but he has escaped, and you can presume he's alive. Sir, Protective Services should be made aware. That's up to security forces, and for now, General Valentine insists it stay under wraps. But I really felt you needed to know. Serenity realized the trap she had been put into. If the information leaked out at all, the Admiral would lose his position and face jail time. But that wasn't the worst of it. He could well have something on her now, leverage to get her to transfer to another desk job. Well played, Admiral. Thank you, sir. It'll stay between us. Good. I'll give you new orders when you come in for repairs. The transmission ended. Roger Matthews was out and free. Could he dare try to get back to the ship and come after her again? Seemed unlikely, even impossible. But escape from New Alcatraz was supposed to be impossible too. Janice and Carlson had talked for 20 minutes. Carlson couldn't help himself. He was a talker by nature. It had finally occurred to him that perhaps giving Janice the cold shoulder wasn't the best tactic to deal with his own issues. It had been his hope to not have to get close to any of his partners again. He always knew that wasn't practical. He could be friendly without becoming friends. So you never did answer me on that partner of yours, Janice nudged him gently. We don't talk about my last partner. Mike slammed his glass down on the bar. Rage seemed to boil up from him deep inside. Alcohol was only aiding in the release of the suppressed anger, fear, and pain. He turned away from Janice, embarrassed. Janice looked took him by the shoulder and pulled him around to face her. She had anger in her eyes, but it was controlled. Listen to me, asshole. I come here dreading this assignment, only to be angered by a smart-ass corporal who had me figured out pretty damn good. I spent the next week trying to learn about you, this ship, and what my job will be. You've rewarded me by saying a handful of words to me. The people on this ship seem to think you're great, but you've been nothing but a dick to me. Janice still clung on to Carlson's shoulder. His anger started to slip away. With it no longer available to mask his feelings, tears welled up in his eyes. She released him, and he turned to face his drink. He felt her hand on his back. After several moments, Janice spoke. Sorry, it's just, I can't find anything on the guy. It's been restricted. And Roger Matthews is a traitor. Carlson's own words surprised him. It actually felt good to say it. Took a huge breath. He attempted to kill the captain, shot another officer who later died, and worst of all, managed to avoid the needle. Carlson stood up. He felt renewed to speak to someone about it, but exhausted. He walked out of the bar without saying another word, leaving Janice alone. All right. I need another sip of water. I hope I'm doing okay on the reading, guys. I would appreciate your feedback. We still got another 20 minutes of time, and then I'll of course, if there's any questions or comments, we can kind of go through them at the end. But we're going to jump right into chapter 5, which is a really short one. Like I said, I write pretty short chapters. I'll talk about that maybe a little after we're done reading. Roger Matthews looked at the screen as the transmission with his contact loaded. There was a certain amount of anonymity needed with these transmissions. The encryption process alone took some time. He set up his privacy screen image. A simple color pattern was enough for him, and engaged the voice disguiser. If anyone happened to get around the encryption, they wouldn't be able to see who was talking or recognize the voice. He brushed off his red uniform, a ridiculous color for a Navy uniform, but these damn Martians were so proud of their red planet. They painted the ships red, they wore red uniforms, and he was surprised there was no requirement to have red underwear. An image appeared. The familiar pre-unification painting, the Son of Man, filled up the image screen with an apple hiding the face of a man in a hat. His contact always used this picture, which was interesting considering the contact's voice morphed into something that led him to believe it belonged to a female. Names were never used. That was obviously foolish, but there was really no way of knowing for sure. Are you there? The voice said. I'm here, Matthew paused. Is this important? You shouldn't be risking contacting me here. Important? Of course it's important. You failed, and you failed miserably. The voice distinguisher had trouble with the rapid raise in volume. How many civilians died? She was your target, not all those other people you killed. You told me you wanted her dead. I told you I'd do it my way. Matthews took a drink of water. Killing Serenity was not necessary to accomplish his own plans. Well, she isn't dead, is she? Not yet. You've already failed twice. After the first time I got you out of the death penalty, and I got you out of and now I got you out of that inescapable prison. Then I got you the right connections on the Red Planet. I've taken a lot of risks for you. I deserve some insights here. Matthews hated the fact that his contact obviously knew who he was, but he knew nothing about her or him. It had bothered him from the beginning, but the amount of money he was getting was worth it. And this person wasn't in as much control as they thought they were either. You're not the only one to take risks. I gave up a job. I'm a traitor to Earth. Twice over now, I might add. I have nothing now except what you paid me, which was frozen by the Earth government after my arrest. There was a bit of embellishment in that fact, but as long as his contact thought Matthews was down on his luck, it would work in his favor. You told me you could handle this, and I told you not to underestimate her ability to command. She surprised me with some maneuvers that resulted in a boarding landing nowhere near the bridge. Security forces is just too well trained to get to her from that far away. A hint of pride slipped from Matthew's voice. I told you I would kill her, and I will. And how do you plan to do it this time? The last attempt may well propel Earth into some type of military action. Good, Matthews thought. I have a man on the inside working to solve this problem one-on-one. You couldn't do yourself, and you were close to her all the time. How do you expect someone else to handle it? Simple. I had to do it with Carlson around. This person won't. And that is all. And that's all I'm prepared to share. But Matthews ended the transmission. He was worried about angering his contact. In fact, he wasn't worried about angering his contact. In fact, he could care less. Matthews had far more money and power than his contact could possibly know. The only reason he still pursued this assignment was because, for now, attacking Captain Christina's Serenity went along with his current plans. Chapter 6. Carlson liked working nights because it kept him off the bridge, but the day crew wasn't coming in, so he and Janice had no choice but to hold over. There was one positive note. Carlson actually got to see Serenity. He really hadn't seen her much since he sat with her in sick bay for a week. She seemed to be moving better, and he was pleased she'd healed so fast. She was going to bed before Carlson ever got on shift. But that was new. Carlson wasn't sure if she was trying to avoid him or if it was just part of her recovery. Serenity was the most beautiful woman Carlson knew. He would never tell her that. That would be a certain transfer and reassignment. She could not have any romantic interest from a crew member. She'd have to report it as soon as he spoke the words out, and Serenity would do it too. She was loyal to Earth, and she loved her position too much. And Carlson loved his assignment too much to say anything. There was only one person Carlson ever confessed this to, and he turned out to be a traitor. Luckily, he was in New Alcatraz, and no one would ever believe him if he said anything. Serenity was sitting at her desk now. Her blonde hair shimmered with the overhead lighting of the ready room. She was short, but the way she carried herself made her seem taller. Her curves were well defined in her well-tailored Navy uniform. She looked up, and he glanced away, all too aware he had been staring at her. He glanced back at her, and she smiled at him. He smiled back. Corporal? Even with the formality in her voice, even with the formality, her voice made his heart skip a beat. Ma'am? How are you holding up? Well, Carlson turned to Janice for a moment. As good as can be expected. Carlson nodded and went back. Serenity nodded and went back to her work for a moment. She stopped again and stood up. Officer Cantor, would you give us a moment? Janice seemed puzzled and waited for a response. He nodded to her, and she walked out onto the bridge. Serenity took a seat on the couch. She patted the seat next to her, gesturing for Carlson to sit. That would be uncomfortable for Carlson. If it's all the same, I'll stand, ma'am. It's not all the same. Sit down, Carlson. Carlson took a seat as far away as he could, while still sitting on the couch. He felt silly for being so awkward about this. It was as if he was a teenager sitting next to his crush for the first time. Mike, relax. This isn't formal. With the authority out of her voice, Carlson found it soothing. He nodded and took a deep breath to try to show he was relaxed. He wasn't. I understand you spent a lot of time with me in sick bay when I was still unconscious. She turned away from him now. This was it. She knew something now. She was going to let him know she was reporting her suspicions. At least he didn't get a transfer order without an explanation. I felt responsible for what happened. I had to make sure it was all right. It wasn't your fault, Mike. She scooted over next to him, resting her hand on his shoulder. A calming touch, but it had little effect on Carlson's nerves. I shouldn't have left the area. It's against protocol for a reason. A mistake. I won't make twice. Carlson slumped a bit forward, but quickly sat back upright. Well, I want you to know that I don't blame you. Serenity patted his shoulder. You deserve the medal you got, even if you don't think so. I'd be dead if you hadn't been there for me, and I want to thank you for your emotional support during my recovery. I may not have been awake to know about it, but I'm sure it must have been helpful. Serenity stopped at the door as the door opened. Janice stuck her head in. She stared at them for several moments. Is there something you need, officer? Serenity said as she stood up. Carlson quickly jumped to his feet. Sorry to interrupt, ma'am. I have a crewman who wishes to speak to you. Send him in. Janice walked in with the man about her height, but he was definitely larger in width. His uniform reflected he was a gunner. His eyes were swollen red. Clearly he'd been crying. What is it, Petty Officer? Serenity had compassion in her voice. Petty Officer Borvis, ma'am. He stopped a few feet from her. Can I talk to you alone? It's a private matter. Certainly. Serenity turned to Carlson and nodded. He knew what that meant. She was okay with seeing him alone. Carlson didn't like leaving emotional people alone with the captain, so he was going to at least check him for weapons. Then he could stay close enough to the door to hear any confrontations. Emotions change quickly. Sad can go from mad faster than Carlson could react. Petty Officer, we need to just do a quick check for weapons, then we'll step out. Carlson gave a nod to Janice that would indicate for her to take over. She understood. Turn around, put your hands on the wall. Janice pointed to an open wall near the front door. She pulled out her chip reader and scanned it. The information came up on Carlson's screen as well. It was still processing. Do you have anything on you that could poke, stick, or otherwise hurt me? No, Boris said dryly. Carlson watched as Janice went through the pat-down, stopped. She stopped a moment when she got to one of his legs. What's this? In the same moment, Boris swung his elbow back, hitting Janice in the chest. Janice stumbled back. Carlson called for help on his radio and rushed in. Boris swung his right arm around, trying to strike Carlson. Carlson stepped back to avoid the hit. Janice knocked him to the ground. While Janice grappled for his arms, Carlson put a knee on his back, on the back of Boris's neck. As Janice pulled his arms back, Carlson restrained him. The door flew open. Carlson had his weapon halfway out of the holster when he saw it was two security forces patrolmen. Boris was screaming something. My sister is dead. It's her fault. I'm going to kill her. Janice reached down the same leg and pulled out a large knife. She looked it over. Pretty big for typical ship duties. Carlson radioed for the code green. He read over his scanner. Petty Officer 3rd Class Boris Santiago, currently on emotional leave. He was still awaiting evaluation when they would arrive. He was likely awaiting evaluation when they arrived for repairs the next day. As Boris was taken from the room, Carlson went over to Serenity. She appeared scared, something Carlson had only seen once before. Captain? She looked up at him. Her eyes met his. Carlson wanted to hug her, but he couldn't. This is one guy who couldn't handle the emotional toll of a military conflict. It happens. No one was hurt. Serenity had just watched Carlson and Cantor take out a man who was apparently ready and able to kill her. She turned away to hide her face. The day after hearing Matthews was released, someone tried to kill her again. That wasn't a coincidence. She looked at Carlson right in the eyes. I need you, Mike, she thought. I need someone I can trust. This is one guy who couldn't handle the emotional toll of a military conflict. It happens. No one is hurt. She just nodded. Carlson lowered his voice to a whisper. Matthews is in prison. This has nothing to do with him. She wanted to tell Carlson the truth right then and there. Matthews is out, Mike. No one knows where he is, but he's free. Instead, she said, I know, just so soon. She raised her voice a bit, looking past Mike at Janice. That was certainly a surprise. Janice rubbed her chest. Yeah, I'll say. All right, guys. That's 6 chapters down. We got about 6 minutes left in my reading time. The chapters have been fairly short. Should we go for chapter 7 or wrap it up for the night? What do you think? What's the chat think? We did have a little mic interruption. We could use that as an excuse to go longer. Who doesn't like reading? She should have said something to him. Yeah, she should have, shouldn't she? Because we know what happens when you're not honest, yeah? That's true. Shit happens. Some shit's already happened, hasn't it? I'm good to read one more if the chat wants to stick with me. But I'm also okay to chat a little bit about what we just read the last 6 chapters, and we can pick up on chapter 7 next week. I wish I knew how to do a poll. I got to learn how to do the poll so I could put a poll up and we could vote on it. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say we stop here at chapter 7 then. And we could talk a little bit about it. So, as you guys notice, we're 7 chapters in just an hour. So I write 6 chapters in. I write short chapters. They get a little longer as in my other novels, which you guys have probably been seeing scrolling. So I guess because I was also getting ready for bed, does Mike like both ladies, Janice and Serenity? I don't know if he's confused so much as I would say, without giving away too much, I think Serenity is definitely has his heart, a place in his heart. Whereas Janice, I think he just sort of kind of covered that and clarify who is this Matthews guy again. So Matthews used to be Carlson's partner, and Janice is coming in to replace Matthews. And it turns out, what we've learned so far anyway, is that Matthews was involved in a plot to try to kill Captain Serenity that somehow, we haven't quite learned the details yet, but somehow Carlson was able to stop that from happening. And then, yeah, so that's this is kind of interesting one. So since we're chatting about it, I wrote this back. This was a while ago. So let me see. It's probably around when my oldest was born. 05, 06, somewhere in there. 04. I think it was after I was married. But anyway, somewhere in that time I wrote this out. This entire manuscript. It was really, really long. Started in a completely different place, and then in 2011, I think. Let me look at the copyright date on this. And yeah, 2011, I went back and finally started writing again. And I opened up this manuscript and kind of hated it, but didn't hate it. I loved the story, but I just felt like places were wrong, situations were wrong, that kind of thing. So I mixed it all around. And then, as I kind of said, I write shorter chapters. I tend to write short. So if anyone goes to my website, they'd see my short stories. Most of those are flash fiction, under 1,000 words. And that tends to be the style I write in. When I get to the sequel to this book, Illusion of Victory, the chapters are a little bit longer. In fact, that's the most recent novel release. But even in Broken Trust, they're a little bit longer. And same with Volition Agent, which are all stories I plan to read on Richard Reads as we complete these different stories. And so, Dissolution of Peace is the first one. The tagline, I didn't read it when I started, but it's "The line has been drawn, who will cross first?" So, I probably should have done that at the beginning and read it, but maybe I'll read the back of the book blurb when I do our stream next Sunday. There is a Twitch poll, where I'm trying to kind of see what people think is the best time to do these readings, and so. You can always go and click on that and give that a read. What else? What other comments about this? What else would you guys like to hear or know about Christina Serenity, Janice Cantor, and Mike Carlson? who are our three main characters so far. I typically write most of my novels with 3 to 4 main characters. This one has 3.5, so to speak. We haven't met. We've been briefly introduced to one, but we haven't. She hasn't gotten involved yet, so. Hopefully I did well in the reading. I like to share my stories, but I'm not a professional story reader in terms of that cadence. Okay. I don't know why it keeps shutting off on me at random. I'll have to find out what's going on with that. Seems to not like when I sit back in my chair. So next week we will come back. We will read again. We will start at chapter 7. Um, if you jumped in here in the middle, you missed parts, or you miss out, I will take these and put them up on YouTube within the next week. So they might be a week behind or so. Um, my headset is tired. I'm really surprised I'm having issues with it. But I especially because it's still telling me it's at 100%. But it probably just knows we're wrapping up, and that's like when I go to the conventions, they have somebody come in to the conventions, and about 10 minutes before the panel is supposed to be over, they come in with a sign. It says 10 minutes left, and then 5 minutes left, and then, time to shut up. So maybe that's what my headset is telling me, time to shut up. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the reading. I look forward to coming back next week and reading on from chapter 7. And again, if you missed it, it'll be on YouTube. If you missed any parts, want to re-listen to the reading, it's going to be on YouTube and sometime in the next 48 hours to a week, depending on when I can bring it over. Thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate everybody taking the time to come and listen to me read. And please give me a follow if you didn't, so you can get notifications when I do these reads next time. And our next reading is scheduled for next Sunday. When I bring up the ending slide, it'll be up there. So check me out. You can check me out on Twitter. You can check me out on my website, and you can check me out on my Discord, which we are trying to build a writing community on our Discord as well. So please, you can find all those linked next to my social links on the bottom. Thanks again, everybody. You guys have a great night. Hope that your work week, if you're starting your work week, it goes well. Thanks, everybody.